So this has been a pretty challenging year this year for wheat. I'm guessing there's a few of you that have probably had to till up some fields this year. Maybe a few. Yeah. We actually had a fairly good stand here. We basically had this wheat planted on October 2nd. Things looked pretty good in the fall. Came back in the spring and things weren't as pretty as they should have been, right? So a couple of things that we've done out here is we actually have a study that's looking at fall versus spring applications of various herbicides that are commonly used in wheat. And the the twist to this one is this wheat has been frost seeded with clover. The clover was frost seeded in April, which you would think is pretty late, but you think about what kind of winter we had, it kind of hung on for quite a while. So we had, what was actually put out here was a mixture of medium red clover and also mammoth clover. We would generally recommend medium red clover. A lot of times with the mammoth clover you can actually see it take over the wheat, and you might have, if you took a look at any of Kurt's plots, you're going to see that that clover is getting fairly tall, very close to those wheat heads, and that can be an issue. So what we wanted to do is actually see what effect those herbicide applications had on that clover. Because as we start moving forward, there's a lot of people that are wanting to use a lot more cover crops, and this is one that a lot of people want to use. Basically, from spring applications, the only herbicide that is labeled is actually MCPA, in which clover is going to be able to survive. And if you take a look at these plots, you're basically going to see that still MCPA is the only one that you can apply in the spring. However, with fall applications, we've looked at a few different herbicides, and the clover is still living from that frost-seeded clover from those fall herbicide applications. All the fall herbicide applications were made in November, basically when the wheat was at the two-leaf stage. And the main reason we're looking at some of these fall applications is some of the different weed problems that we have, we can actually clean some of those problems up with fall applications. So for example, over the last 2 years we had done quite a bit of work looking at common windgrass control. And in fact, this is kind of an adult common windgrass. If anybody wants to come take a look a little bit later, you can take a quick look at this. Windgrass actually comes up in the fall about the same time as wheat. It's got a very thin leaf, and it's very small. When it first comes up, it's kind of thread-like, and as it continues to grow, you see that the ligule, basically where the leaf is attached to the stem, is it's membranous, so it's clear, it's long, and it's jagged. And basically, most of our windgrass is going to come up in the fall. And from some of our work, we found that fall applications of either PowerFlex or Osprey have done very good at controlling common windgrass in the fall, and basically is held through to the spring. So that's one of the reasons we're looking at some of these fall applications. A couple other herbicides that are really commonly used in wheat are things like Affinity Broadspec and also Husky. We wanted to see what effect those herbicide applications in the fall have on frost-seeded clover. Clarity is another herbicide that we can apply in the fall, so we wanted to see if basically we could frost-seed clover after a Clarity application. We also looked at 2,4-D. 2,4-D is not labeled for fall applications, and in general we do not want to use it in the fall. One of the main reasons for this is we can have some issues with wheat development, and we have seen that before where there's been a lot of fields that have been applied in the fall with 2,4-D and have had some yield issues further down the road. So again, the 2,4-D is just kind of as a comparison to the spring, but it is not labeled in the fall. So just keep that in mind, but we do have it out here. So when we look at our plots, you're going to see that our fall applications, there is still clover in all those fall applications, so, or with any of those herbicides. So that kind of gives us some, some positives. So we look at it, If we have windgrass as a problem, we might use Powerflex or Osprey. We've got the same stand there. We do see a little bit of stunning from that, and once the wheat comes off, we'll be able to see if that clover can take off. With the Affinity broad spec applications in the fall, we've got a nice stand of clover. The clover looks very similar to our untreated, doesn't look injured at all. The other thing that we did notice from our fall applications of Affinity broad spec is you can see out here we have a pretty good population of common lamb's quarters. In all of our Affinity plots, the common lamb's quarter control is very good, which was very unexpected to me. One of the reasons is, again, lamb's quarters is a spring emerging weed, and we just wouldn't think that that Affinity would hold out long enough to keep that lamb's quarter under control. So with 1 year data, we've actually saw some pretty good control of the common lamb's quarters. Now, keeping that in mind, a lot of the spring weeds that we might have, things like common ragweed, are probably going to be a problem and not going to be controlled by these fall applications. But if you have problems like common chickweed, henbit, a lot of the winter annual weeds, some of these fall applications are going to be pretty good. So if we can basically clean up the weeds, do a frost seeding of clover after these fall applications, we probably would have fairly decent control of some of those weeds, because that clover could probably potentially help in our weed control with some of those summer annual weeds, particularly if we have a really good wheat stand, which right here we don't necessarily have this year with some of the issues that we had with winter kill. Couple other things I wanted to mention. We had a fall application of husky. I think with that, we maybe developed a new clover population or a new clover biotype, because if you look in that particular plot, you're going to see clover that has white leaf margins around it. The clover looks fine, but it's kind of showing some of the symptoms from the husky. So it looks a little bit different, but we do have the population out there and it seems to be growing okay. So we're seeing a little bit of injury from that. Couple other things I want to point out. The very last plot, you're going to see a sign that says spray boom overlap. That was overlap from, there were dry beans out here last year, and reflex was applied a little bit later in the season. We had some overlap, and you can get some carryover. So some of the carryover symptomology for wheat is basically you lose stand, okay? So as you go over there, you're going to see that there's some stand gone, and that is basically from reflex carryover that was applied to the wheat, or excuse me, applied to the dry beans. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that you guys that are growing dry beans, reflex is very popular to use because that's basically the only thing we have for common ragweed control. And there is a 4-month rotation restriction to planting winter wheat, which makes it really tough when we start looking at our application window to our planting window. So it can be a problem with carryover from those reflex applications, particularly later in the season and if we're dry. One of the reasons that we're seeing more of this year is we were very dry later on in the summer, and in order for reflex to break down, we need to have moisture. And with that moisture, we also need to have heat. So as we were dry, and then we had that early winter where it was cold, that herbicide was not breaking down, and that's why we did see some carryover, particularly in that last plot when there was an overlap. Another thing I wanted to bring out here is we do have a few samples of corn that show some of the symptoms that you might see from reflex carryover, and basically that is venal chlorosis and pretty much a weak midrib, and in some cases you'll see the corn plants twist like this, okay? And this one is probably not going to be okay, but a lot of times when we do see some of the carryover symptoms, the corn plants can outgrow it. So just as another indication of some of the things to think about when you're going from one crop to the next, what are some of the challenges that you might have with carryover? One last thing I want to mention is because of the spring that we had with it being wet and then the wheat took off, a lot of our herbicide applications did not happen this year. The other thing is with some of the poorer stands, we have a lot of weeds that are going to be a problem at harvest. Just to mention, we do have some herbicides that are labeled for pre-harvest applications. Things like glyphosate can be used, 2,4-D can be used, Clarity can be used, and also AIM. So we've got those 4 options that can be used as pre-harvest treatments. Key things to think about: that wheat needs to be in the hard dough stage, okay, number 1. And many of those applications can only take place after the seed moisture is 30% or less. So those are the 2 key things to keep in mind, and most of the pre-harvest intervals are 7 days. So we're going to be dealing with a lot of green weeds when we're trying to harvest that wheat. Those pre-harvest applications are probably something that a lot of people are going to be looking at this year to try to make sure they get those weeds dried down so wheat harvest goes a lot better. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. Yes?
What was the rate of reflex?
In this case, it was a full pint that was applied last year. And that 4-month window was not met. So, you know, we're looking at an October 2nd planting date.
So that was actually a quart then on the overlap? Would that have been a quart on the overlap then?
Yes, it would have been a quart on the overlap. Well, I wouldn't say that, because I think if you go out there, there are some other spots out there that show some reduced stand.
How far back does the actual herbicide plot go? Just to the first break?
So we've got 4 replications. So let's say you want to look at PowerFlex in the fall again. This is treatment number 4. You can go back and look for treatment number 4 on any of those sticks. So we got 4 reps. So, like, yep, straight back. So you can see the 4 individual blocks.
Your fall herbicide in November, is that normal?
So we were really shooting for kind of 2-leaf wheat. We have done, you know, late October, but most of the time it ends up being mid-November by the time that those applications are made. And remember, mid-November last year was pretty cold, right? Or it was cooler. So those herbicide applications still will work.
So pre-tiller then, pretty much?
Well, we're looking at, yeah, 2-leaf. Yep, you got, most of those are 2-leaf is yep, 2-leaf or larger. Any other questions?
Got one for dry beans.
Yes, dry bean question.
Put on Reflex and Raptor last week.
Okay.
3.5 ounces of Raptor, 8 ounces of Reflex, and I lamb's quarter that tall. Those were dead, but and we just got rain here. We've been really dry up in the thumb. Just little weeds like that. Is the Raptor gonna get them yet or not?
That's a good question because there's not a lot of residual on Raptor.
How about the
Reflex, you're kind of at such a low rate.
I did have 16 ounces of Basogram also.
Okay.
But I was scared
to wait too much.
Because the lamb's quarter were that tall already. And, you know, once you get them bigger than that, then they're hard to kill. And
yeah.
So if they're coming, what's the next option? Now the elevator told me to go back in with more Reflex and some more Basogram and try and get them.
The Reflex doesn't do anything to lamb's quarters,
No.
so I wouldn't do that. If anything, it would be more Basogram. That would be the only option.
Now here about 4 years ago, I went back in and a nozzle problem behind the sprayer that I didn't see, so it was getting like a half rate on, so I had strips of lamb's quarter. I went back in with a 4-wheeler and put it on. You know, we put on 4 ounces when the lamb's quarter was that big, and it got them again.
4 ounces of
a Raptor.
Okay.
And it got them. So can I go back in with a couple ounces of Raptor again?
So you've got 3.5?
Yes.
As long as you're not seeing any injury from the Raptor.
No, not yet.
Okay.
I put, you know, it was perfect timing because I put them on late at night.
Okay.
And it was cloudy, and then we got rain right away.
Because usually
it was cool. So.